Thank you, Philip, for making time. I know that you are in Italy now, and it's a pity you cannot be here with us, but we totally understand. And we have gathered here the group of Inland Academia Campo Adentro, where we are working on different issues connecting with cultural strategies on the rural. We are taking, we're profiting from the context of Kassel and Documenta being a cultural event, in this case, organized by Ruang Grupa, a collective from Indonesia, very much also focusing on the idea of collective action and actually to look critically at how global capitalism is affecting, at different levels. So it connects very much with the work you have been doing. Both Philip and Sofia work within FIAN and its organization, but very much as well supporting and facilitating the global process of organization and contestation of Via Campesina and other grassroots movements connecting with the food sovereignty movement. So especially in the IPC, that it's a space of civil society with the FAO, the civil society mechanism, and also the independent, well, the IPC is more an independent network for different organizations working for food sovereignty. We will have tomorrow a talk with Paula Joya, and I'm not sure if you will be connecting as well. But today we wanted to focus on understanding better the situation, the analysis of the current problematic that we see rising and that you have been studying for quite some time, of the digitalization of the countryside. And I remember when we started to talk about this a couple of years ago, maybe, you were highlighting the importance to open a social debate, a public debate about this as much as possible. We have also here participants from media studies or lens-based class, and I think that will be also interesting because maybe they have also another view, another understanding of digitalization in relation to media and the question of reclaiming as well and open access to the potentials of the internet, and we can maybe explain that later better. Hi, Sofia. Thank you so much for joining. Sofia was feeling not very well, and I hope you are getting better. Thank you so much.
Yes. Hi, Fernando, and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, apologies, I couldn't join. I was looking forward for so long to be with you today, but unfortunately, I got sick from a travel, and I had to stay here at home. But I'm delighted to be able to be with you, at least via Zoom. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you to both. We are here in the Natural Science Museum of Kassel, where we are also organizing our exhibition space and so on. And here in the floor, what you can see is the pedagogical tools that the educational department of the museum is using to connect kids from different ages with natural sciences. And what is interesting is that they just borrow and grab objects from the collection itself. So it's interesting because it's encouraging, direct use of those inherited objects, and also we are very much encouraging a notion of citizen science. So the Museum of Kassel developed an application. It's an app that they encourage also neighbors from Kassel and around to use to determine the species of insects, the species of flora that one can find in their everyday walks, and then upload it. And it's related with that digitalization somehow of the experience of learning and sharing about the distribution of the species and the decline on biodiversity. But I think that what connects maybe what we will be talking today is about how we manage to secure that technology is actually at the service of the people and not the opposites, so that we are at the service of technology, and moreover to those who promote and a certain degree control the technology. So that's very much is now being more and more of, at the core of a debate on the current evolution of farming systems, the robotization and digitalization of farming systems. So I don't know if at some point, and I know that both you are very experts on this field, but if you would like to maybe as a duet explain a little bit on how you found that this was a crucial issue to look at, and what are like the many specific forms in which this problem is manifesting. And maybe later we can continue in dialogue and so on. So thank you so much. And we are also emitting live and recording the call as well. So it later also another tool for the Inland Academy participants to do research more. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you, Fernando. Sofia, it's all right if I start. Okay, that's what we said. Okay, hello to everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So my name is Philip. I'm, joining you remotely. I'm in Italy. Looks like, I'd love to be there with you. I think I'm not sure to what extent I agree with everything that Fernando said about when introducing myself as a big expert on digitalization. Actually, I must admit I was a bit wasn't entirely sure what to expect today. So what I was thinking and was I kind of it's more like I will not give a long, lengthy presentation with lots of fancy terms. What I thought was perhaps more interesting is to do something quite basic and maybe end my input with some points that might be interesting for discussion with you, because I think that would be the interesting part. The interesting part is maybe not that I tell you what I think about these things, but that we think together what they mean in general, what they mean in the context of food, agriculture, of pastoralism and shepherding, and what they mean in the term in terms of culture and related to cultural expression. So I will start with some of that, and then I think Sofia will add on something which is a bit different, and where we speak also a bit about our organization, which is called FIAN, as Fernando said. As I said, and I think I will try to share my screen. I haven't done, it's not something very fancy in terms of presentation, but maybe it can still be useful to guide us a bit, because I will also use some terms. So maybe it's useful if they are on the screen. I hope you can see it. Okay. So it's quite basic, and I try to be short as well. I think the first thing that I want to say is just about like a bit to focus ourselves. I don't know like how much you have thought about this or discussed about this issue. So maybe it's useful to say something. What is this thing of digitalization and food and agriculture, and why are we talking about it? And then in a second part, I wanted to make it a bit concrete, especially in the context of livestock farming, because we are an inland academy. So that's what I understand is the issue that you're interested in. And then point in the third part to some kind of issues. But as I said, it's not a final discussion. It's rather putting some elements on the table that we could possibly then also discuss a bit about more. So as I will take on Fernando's question for final, what he mentioned at the end is like, why is this issue of digitalization worth talking about? And actually, I think a very easy indicator in a way is that everybody's talking about it. Like over the past years, if you listen to governments, if you listen to international institutions like the United Nations, everybody is talking about digitalization, and we need more digitalization, and we need kind of to unlock the potential of digital technology. So there is a whole debate and discourse going on. So I think at the very least, one has to figure out why is this happening, and what is this actually about. So there are many buzzwords, right, that are flowing around, and it's often like they're packaged under were under concepts like digital food and digital agriculture, which in themselves are kind of strange, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, I think until now, at least, the food we eat is still like it has to be material in a way, but it's kind of become like a tag to say like this is digital food and there is something like digital agriculture. And even also in agriculture, you could ask yourself, okay, there are tools and there is something with digital, but does that make agriculture digital? Or are we still in the real world? And then what is the relation between the technology and what is happening in the fields or in the pastures around the world? This whole discourse is presented, or the whole discussion is framed in a way that is obviously like the next step of a modernization of agriculture. And in a way, often it's presented as something as unavoidable, right? Just as the mechanization of agriculture in the 20th century is something that was kind of necessary on the way of progress. Now we have the next technological frontier in a way. So we are now speaking about, kind of unleashing the potential of the digital sphere. And in a way, there is a lot of continuity to previous technological advances and how they are presented, right? So there is obviously an argument with increased productivity. There is an argument with increased efficiency. And what is an important argument, which is perhaps slightly newer, is that there is a very strong focus on sustainability. So on climate change mitigation, responses to, the ongoing ecosystemic destruction and so on, so that in the, let's say, dominant or the official narrative that is presented by many of the institutions that I mentioned earlier, this one of the things that we can achieve with digital technology is to make food production and food systems in general more sustainable and more efficient. What I think is important is also perhaps in this context to state is that terms are not neutral, as I think you probably know. So the way you frame things will already shape the kind of discussion that you have. And I think one of the other words that is kind of used a lot is about innovation. And this term innovation is another term that we can discuss a lot about in the context also of agriculture and farming. But in the debates that are taking place, very much is like used as the same thing, digital technologies. Today, innovation means applying digital technologies and then also other technologies like, biotechnologies, genetic techniques, and these kinds of things. So, but maybe this is already something we can keep for a discussion, like, isn't innovation something broader, especially in the context of when we look at farming? And then this also takes up something that Fernando just said. I think it's important to understand, that the digital technologies are an instrument also for the expansion of capitalistic control, which firstly is also, again, like not something new, but I think whenever new technologies were promoted, it was usually also a way of expanding capitalistic control. The other thing I would like to say about this is that this does obviously not mean that technology in general and digital technologies are necessarily only about expansion of capitalistic control. But the question is, I think the way they are promoted by the powerful actors today is very much in this sense. So I guess a big part of the question, and maybe a part of our discussion today, could also be, what are different ways, or what are different ways of kind of using those technologies that, serve perhaps other purposes. And then before, as a transition, is just because I understand Inland Academy is very much also about, shepherding, about animal, about livestock farming. This whole block of or set of technologies that is often presented as precision farming and in the context of livestock farming, it's presented as, you know, its use of data and the analysis to manage your animals, to manage the flock. And I think it's interesting that this is something that is already quite advanced in, you know, in the big cow, like in the big dairy production, for instance. There is already a lot of digitalization or use of digital tools, but the extensive pasture environment, this is how they call this kind of extensive livestock farming, especially with small animals like sheep and goats, is still kind of a frontier that has to be taken. And it's interesting, like how this is also framed in different publications. So this is a bit where I want to speak a bit now more specifically about after this more general introduction. So as I said, there is this kind of very broad push by different actors, and it's not only governments. Obviously, there's also like business involved, different types of business. And one of the sectors where it's now kind of trying to be pushed is extensive livestock farming. And just to make it not too abstract, I just wanted to list some of the technologies that are being promoted. I will not go into depth into it because I also am not a technical expert on these issues, but just to get an idea what's the kind of technology and application that is being applied and kind of what falls into this whole discussion. And some of this, as you will know, is not so new actually, but some of them is perhaps also new. So for instance, one of the things that is being promoted is this whole issue of identifying animals through electronic means. And this is kind of ear tags, but there are also other issues like, you know, other ways like sensors and these kind of thing. And it's related also to geopositioning of, you know, flocks and how they move. Not exactly the same thing, a bit broader. There's like this whole thing of, you know, putting sensors on animals in a different way. It can be under the skin. It can be like make them swallow them. And actually it's kind of measuring all types of things. So measuring how they move, measuring their temperature, measuring whatever, like whatever, you name it, more or less, you can sense it. And then you have, and I put just some of these technical terms, not because I think, because it's just like, I think when you're interested and you start reading about these things, these are terms that you will come across, what they call stationary management tools. So that means like when the animals are in the barn or somewhere there, so you have like places where, you know, they pass on and automatically they will be weighed, so you have their weight. And you have slightly similar things also when they are on the pasture. And one of the technologies that is very much like promoted there is like virtual fences, right? You don't have like physical fences, but they have some kind of an electronic collar. When they kind of leave a certain area, then there will be like an electroshock, and that will make them stay on the one side. And so you can manage them more easily. And then you have finally the whole, what I said earlier on, like the dairy sector is already quite digitalized. And obviously like in this extensive livestock farming, you also have that part. I mean, not always, but to some extent. So this whole milking robots and kind of precision feeding things that are kind of used in those big dairy farms today. As I said, this is more like a thing like to make it a bit concrete. And I think the last part is just to kind of, this is more an invitation for a discussion. You know, this is what kind of, what does this mean and what are the issues with this? And I actually, when I was like preparing this talk, I was reading again some of the stuff that I had been reading over the past years. And actually it's interesting how these topics are framed, especially by people who are very eager to push these technologies. And I stumbled across this one quotation, and I will just read the first one, but it says that about sheep farmers, as any other producer, they adopt technologies that are fit for their needs and the value of which they can easily recognize. So when I read this sentence, I was thinking like, this is pretty common sense, right? I mean, why would anybody like adopt a technology that doesn't respond to a need that you have? And why would you adopt a technology that is not like, the value is not like clear to you? But it's interesting that in that article, or in some of the literature, statements like these are framed as a problem, right? Because it's like framed as a problem in the sense of, you know, that there is like reluctance to technology, and there are barriers to the take-up of these technologies, right? So this is interesting, I thought, in a way, because it means like, okay, who actually decides which technology is useful or not, and who should decide to that? And apparently, when you look at this kind of framing, you think like there are people that should use them, but they are just too reluctant to use it. But I wonder, like, if you put yourself as an animal farmer, and then maybe you will just come to a very different framing of the whole thing. There are lots of issues, and I just name a few, and actually I will mainly perhaps insist a bit on the last ones, the last two. But if you look into literature and what is being discussed, I think there are different issues that are being discussed. The one is animal health and well-being, because obviously some of these technologies, they are kind of invasive in the sense, you know, like sensors, you have to put them on the animals, and you know, so there is an issue here. Which is kind of, a debate that is going on. You have a whole issue of like, there is the financial burden linked to like the uptake of these technologies, and how do you deal with that? And obviously, there is an issue with scale here, because I don't know, what works in a big dairy factory does not necessarily work with, you know, a shepherd, with a flock on pasture and extensive livestock farming. But what I think is probably kind of the more, let's say, broader discussions, and the most interesting discussions, is first of all, the whole implications about, you know, control, self-determination, and sovereignty, right? And I think we are often used a bit to think about these things in terms of data, like, you know, like personal data. But maybe we're a bit less used to think about, you know, what is about this kind of whole issue of non-personal data. And maybe in this context, it's a discussion. It's more tangible, right? I mean, all, like, if you like, all your animals are full of sensors, and there is data being collected everywhere. But where does this data go? And like, whom does it serve? Does it serve the farmer, the shepherd, or does it go anywhere else in a big server farm with some company who will aggregate it? What will it do about it? So there is a whole thing, right, of kind of how much do you kind of win by using a technology, how much like it makes your life easier, but how much also do you give up something that is, in a way, it's yours, even if it's not your personal data, but it's kind of linked to your work. So I think there is a whole discussion, and obviously this is very central to the whole discussion about food sovereignty, which is kind of the broader framing, I think, that we are speaking about this today. And the last point is, and this is something that I also think is a bit linked to the whole discussion of culture, and given that you're the documenta, maybe this is also a kind of a part, is like, how does the uptake of these technologies in a way also modify the ways of living and identity of what what shepherds are and what farmers are and how they define themselves. It's interesting to read and to speak to farmers, because and I've heard about it, especially also with shepherds, where you have like what determines, in a way, what do they think, what do they see as like being very central to their identity. And one part of it is this kind of very close connection to the animals, right, between people and animal. I've read interviews with shepherds, I think from Ireland, where they said, like, why do I need sensors? I spend my day with my animals, so the sensor cannot tell me anything I don't know, right? Because I will know when an animal is sick or whatever. So, and I think in a way, it's kind of this balance that has to be, or that might have to be to be found between, kind of technologies that can serve a certain purpose, but to what extent also does the uptake of that technology change who you are. And I think in the context of farming in general, and also animal farming, here the issue of knowledge is central, right? And I think knowledge is for farming communities and also individual farmers is very linked to like who they are and their ways of living. So I don't think that I am the one to answer to these questions. So I kind of put them more here into the room so that they can be food for thought and possibly for for some reflections and maybe some discussion. And then I would leave it here for now. And I don't know if Fernando wants to say something or if Sofia takes over directly. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Philip. There were some clapping just before. Thank you also for landing your analysis in the pastoralist form of production. And yes, oops, I don't know if Sofia, you would like to continue in some way as well, maybe looking at
I don't know, what do you guys prefer? Should we have a round of interaction with the audience first, perhaps, so that it is not so boring and we just talking, perhaps a round of interaction and then eventually come in, okay?
We can try that, yes.
Yeah.
And while you think, maybe I'll launch a specific question. Recently, there was this, in the press, in the US especially, the question about the access to, or the right to repair farming machinery, and that's involving John Deere company. And actually, John Deere is at the forefront of what is in stake on digitalization. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, what do you both think of this case in particular? How is it useful or not for you to tell about to farmers about what involves? Because this the way in which this technology functions, that GPS function, it's like a mid step between the robot and the traditional way in which a farm vehicle would be operated. I don't know if you wanted to say something about it.
Okay. Well, I think as Philip said, it is very much about who controls the technology, right? So therefore, in that sense, the right to repair is extremely important for that. From that perspective, because retaining the possibility of somehow being able to repair machines is, I think, is a long discussion also in the studies about peasants, how machinery is embedded into peasant farming in a different setting than the, let's say, the industrial capitalist way of farming. It is possible to embedded machines in a different logic of farming. And of course, the issue of repairing, of adapting the machine to the particular needs of the farmer is a key feature of really integrating these tools and machines in a different logic of farming, the peasant farming. So in that sense, I think this is extremely important, and it has other aspects like the one in terms of sustainability, that it is extremely wasteful if machines and tools cannot be repaired, but are just disposed and thrown away any time that they break. So I don't know if there is questions, or perhaps, well, I can give my input now, because yes.
Yes. Hi. I don't think you can see me, but I'm a voice in the room. Right? Hi.
Hello.
My name is Grace. And I'm an artist that works around food systems, and I work primarily with sound. And I live in Mexico, and I work in that context, mostly in the south of the city in Xochimilco. And that's just a little introduction. But right now, I was wondering if you, Felipe, could talk a little bit about some instances of innovation that diverge from this sort of technologically dominated notion of innovation, and if there's like an anti-movement or like acts of resistance against this, and what could some of those examples be? Yeah.
Okay, big issue. Yeah, I think, no, I'm glad that you put it up, because I think we sometimes, we get a bit biased by the way in which certain terms are framed, right? And what I said earlier is like, now we're kind of used as that kind of, yeah, like innovation needs to be something like technologically new. And it has to do like with, and often it's like capital intensive technology, right? It's not like simple technology, but when you look at it like innovation, what does it actually mean, and what actually should it serve? Then I think like, even like connecting to the issue before, right? If you have an agricultural machinery, for instance, and you slightly modify the use, or and this is something what, for example, peasants do all the time, right? I mean, I live in rural Italy, so I see this, like peasants and farmers are very innovative in that way, how they use the different machineries. And if they have a problem and they have a machinery for something different, but then they figure out a way of using that machine in a different way by slightly modifying it so that it serves their need, then I would say that's already like an innovation, right? If you I don't know, you have, you have a certain tool, and then you figure out like by making some kind of small changes, then it serves a different purpose, then that is innovation. And it's very
modification. A modification as a form of innovation?
Yeah, I would think so. The other thing is, for example, like if you think about it, like more like crop farmers or like vegetable farming. In that sense, for example, I would say also, why shouldn't we think that peasants developing or selecting new varieties of certain plants in their fields, and then you have plants that have new traits, for example, that are more resistant to drought, or they are more resistant to cold or to heat or whatever. I think that is, why wouldn't you say this is an innovation, right? In that sense, I think it's been if you think about things like that, then obviously like a whole field opens up of potential innovations that maybe sometimes are not technological at all, right? If you think about crops, or even like animal breeds. I mean, but then if you think about it, like how has farming developed over the centuries? These are the kinds of innovations that have, improved farming and improved productivities. So let's say that I'm saying that in a way to open up our minds about like what is innovation.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that I wanted to say about that is that actually this kind of innovation, when it comes, for example, to things like biodiversity, that's not even something that is kind of super new, but it's actually something that is already recognized as rights. When you look at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, so this is one of the big UN convention, right? And it in one article, it recognizes, and the phrase goes, the traditional knowledge, practices, and innovations of communities, right? So in a way, there is some kind of a recognition, even like in terms of, international right, environmental rights, human rights, that kind of peasants and other like local communities, they have made big contributions to, and that this is called an innovation. So this is maybe to this block, but I think maybe to your question, I don't know if your question maybe was also a bit geared towards like the more, because obviously there is also technological side to innovation. But there again, I think there are movements around the world. I know for example, in the US, but also in Europe, like in France, there's the Atelier Paysan. So they are very much about, kind of building their own tools, building like own farming machines. And in the US, there are some groups that are also linked to, I know about one group that has also like scientists, like computer scientists who come from like the MIT. So they are kind of like cutting edge scientists, and they also think about, kind of what kind of sensors do they already actually need, and or how to, to develop like their own farm management software using kind of sensors that they buy, and then kind of they program their own programs so that they don't have to buy like a commercial program, but they kind of do it on their own. So I think this is a movement that is kind of perhaps a bit more into also really looking into like the tech side of innovation. But I do think that it's useful when we think about terms of innovation, and we think about them in very broad terms, and in a way also in a way of doing justice to all the pastoralists and farmers, and who have for centuries have been like the main drivers of innovations, and even though it's sometimes like invisible innovations, or we take them a bit for granted, but I think they are very important.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mariana. From what you're saying, I am wondering what you think about the scalability of this idea of innovation and technologies. You are kind of referring to technology that is based on the practice on the land, or you're talking about like the use of these in communities, peasants and the countryside, but like what happens when the Zoom goes out and, I don't know, international space satellites are also having like a bigger overview, and like the owners of this data start having some kind of influence over the land in terms of, yeah, the control over it, or in terms of preparation. You started talking, like Sofia, you started talking about something like that, but then we kind of came back. I'm just curious about this, yeah, the scalability of this, of these technologies when it kind of gets out from Earth and comes back. I don't know if it's weird, but my question is not very clear, but yeah, it's something.
Do you want to say something about this, Sofia? Should I? How do you? I don't know. Maybe I will try. I mean, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not getting your point, but I feel that maybe what you are saying is that there is on the one side, let's say the technology maybe and the innovation that you control, but at the same time, there's other ways of technologies that are out of our reach, but that we have to deal with in some way as well. So, and obviously satellites, I mean, except if you're Elon Musk and shoot your own satellites into space, then obviously like, yeah, we're all kind of, I don't know, the whole world, the entire planet Earth is being, I don't know, like, yeah, being surveyed by those those technologies or these kind of tools. And I think that there's obviously a case where maybe that's your question, where like this is something, yeah, that needs to be like treated somewhat differently, or we have to discuss it somewhat differently. I guess there's like a question here. One way of answering to that question is maybe like the question there is like, as you said, like who is, I think you said like who owns the data, or kind of what happens with like the ownership of the data. And I think that's probably one of the big questions. So I think in a way, the question how it's been often discussed, maybe, I don't know, like at least in mainstream media about, you know, when the whole discussion about Facebook and Google and how kind of they all extract our data, they use our data. And then we often discuss about it in terms of personal data, so like our privacy. And this is also where, let's say, we have some safeguards. But what is much less discussed is like, yeah, what about this whole like non-personal data, all this data that is also like, in a way, it's based on common resources, right? Like if you know, if you have information that you gather via satellite about a forest which is not privately owned, then like who should be the owner of that data? And I think this is part of the discussion about rights over data and rights over the infrastructure that kind of collects this data and aggregates this data and stores this data, which is like very, very central to the whole question of, you know, sovereignty. And when we speak about it in terms of food, obviously it's part of, I would say also about this issue of food sovereignty. And it's about, you know, it's about kind of what would be models and kind of, because I think it's a bit too easy to say like whoever collects that data is the owner of that data. Why would that be the case? Why would that be fair, right? If it's like publicly available data, then why would it be the person or the entity collecting it and storing it? Why would it be their data if we all of us produce it, right? And this is kind of at let's say societal scale, it's an issue, but obviously it's also an issue if you think about, you know, what kind of data can you also kind of generate with these kinds of things about specific, like a farm or like a pasture system, by kind of with satellite imagery that you analyze, you can get a lot of information. But is that information the person who analyzes it, or should it be the farmer's information because actually it's his or her farm, you know? So I think it's a very good question you pose. It's a very complicated question. And actually it's a question that when you think about the food sovereignty movement more at large, it's a question that is still very much under discussion and where we still don't have like good answers, right? I'm sure, Sofia, if you want to add something to that.
Yes, well, perhaps I will come to the point, but I will do a little bit of, how do you call that? An umweg.
Detour.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yes, Fernando asked the question, why did we end up looking into decisions? Because after all, we are human rights defenders. We work for an organization working on the right to food and nutrition. So how comes that we are daring to speak about things related to technology? And when preparing for joining the documenta and all the discussions around what is art and the concept of the curators this year, well, I realized that this idea of collective processes, right? Collective processes of transformation is very much at the core of this concept. And therefore, I felt I should tell you a little bit about our own story as FIAN. and it is important because it is important to highlight that what we have become has been through the process of listening and working together with the peoples of the land, with the peasants or the shepherds or the fisher folk. And let me tell you that in the human rights treaties, there is no single mention of the word nature. It didn't appear at all. So this means that we have been conceiving and working about human rights for several decades without taking into account the relationship of us as individuals and persons and as communities with nature, with our ecosystems. So it has been completely delinked. It was completely delinked. And in our case, it was through this listening to the people of the land and the rivers and the forests that they have told to us, well, this relationship is central to our dignity, to our social fabric, to our identity as persons and as communities. And this is the way we started as human rights defenders, as people working somehow with law, international law, national law, to start completely transforming our own activities, you know, our own concepts. And this is what happened when the international peasant movement, La Via Campesina, come up with this proposal of actually recognizing the rights of peasants, that peasants have a right to land, a right to seeds, a right to water, and so on and so forth. And at the beginning of that process, many people thought they are crazy, that would never, you know, that would never happen, that would never be accepted. Peasants, after all, sounds so pejorative in English. So how can you dare to kind of frame something which is so backwards? And I think the climate catastrophe is showing us that this is not backwards. It is probably on the contrary. That the ways of life of indigenous peoples, their knowledge, their wisdom, and also of shepherds, of fisher folk, of peasants, it's extremely important at this very particular moment in history and in time. Well, I'm telling you all this just to tell you how has been our process, our own story of really fundamentally, to some extent, expanding or changing the way we have regarded ourselves as human rights defenders and the very concepts of human rights and what we are doing here. So therefore, the people of the land, of the rivers and of the mountains have been actually our teachers in that sense. And I think this is very important to say. Now, we are looking into issues of technology and digitalization because we understand that this transformation is going to change our societies, our economies, our cultures, and many other things. So, and therefore, we thought it is extremely important that we try to somehow understand what this means. And it is interesting to see that other human rights organizations, mainly, well, those working on civil and political rights, which continues being the mainstream understanding of human rights, look into issues of privacy only, right? So, of course, this is a very important issue, but they don't question let's say, the political economy of digital technologies. They are completely silent and blind to that. They are just concerned about individual rights to privacy. Whereas those of us working on economic and social rights, well, looking into the political economy, it's absolutely important. And those of us who have learned or who have gone through this process of new learning or unlearning, because I think that is the other thing that we probably need to do right now, unlearning with peasants or learning anew with peasants, of course, make us look into digitalization issues from a particular way. And this way is what Philip was explaining, very much shaped by food sovereignty, which means our ability to decide on issues of science as well, not only about politics, but issues of science as well. So therefore, this is the way how we have approached that. Now, knowledge and science is going to be very much at the core of the economies from our future. And I think that shepherds, peasants, indigenous peoples actually they do have precious knowledge. And I think for companies and for capitalism at this stage, having access and monopoly to the benefits of knowledge is the crucial feature of accumulation. So they and with the digital tools, they have all, of course, the means to have access and control all this knowledge. So therefore, I think that this is what the discussion is going to be very much about in the next years. And that's why we are looking into this, because I think we want, from this normative point of view, which is, let's say, the standpoint that we have on things, we want to shape these debates or participate in these debates alongside, of course, with the people of the land, the forests and the deserts. And therefore, that is our approach to that. Yeah, so perhaps I will stop here and then hear from you again. Thank you.
Otherwise, I would also ask you if you have been exchanging with the movements that was rated with proprietary technology and software, more from the free software movement and so on regarding this. And also in your research, you look very much at the data that has been collected, for example, at different levels. I don't know if you could give us a little bit of examples to land a little bit more where are the more critical aspects, no? Like, for example, data, geosatellital data, no? On which surfaces are being grown with what, the application of certain management tools, or for example, the association between buying certain seeds, the land you grow, what you grow, no, and the use of chemicals, for example, that conventional farmers do. So is that the main moment of collecting for the data from the companies?
Yes, on that, Fernando, let me share with you probably this is the part of the latest research that we have done on that. We were requested to write, to research about the degree of digitalization of food systems in Latin America. So this is a research focused on Latin America exclusively. And when doing that research, we discovered that the research on the digitalization of agriculture and food systems is very much focused on what agribusiness is doing. Of course, all the precision agriculture and fintech, and of course the machinery and so on and so forth, robotics and so on and so forth. But we realized that we haven't asked the question, how is digitalization changing the life of small scale farmers? Because they cannot afford to, you know, completely robotize, for instance, dairy farming, right? Or even irrigation. That is simply too expensive. They cannot do that. So what are they doing? What is happening really on the small farms? And so we did that research for Latin America. And we discovered that there are, so Fernando, I see you telling me that we have to close. Okay, so, but perhaps, well, some key messages there. And they are that the infrastructure, just having access to internet, which, you know, is an issue in rural areas in countries like, Colombia or on many other countries in the South. So Microsoft is actually providing the infrastructure to have access to internet in many of these remote areas. So this is an important thing because Microsoft is providing the infrastructure and at the same time, of course, is preparing to provide the platforms for agriculture, education, and health integrated for rural areas. In a country like Colombia, this is happening in the areas where we still have armed conflict. So you can imagine what this means. So this is one of the findings. Another finding is that platforms for e-commerce is the biggest use of small scale farmers in Latin America of these technologies. And of course, we saw that during the pandemic, that cooperatives wanted to sell produce to consumers, and they used the internet for different, you know, arrangements and ways of doing it. So e-commerce is the most important use in Latin America, and compared to other regions like Africa, this is unique because, for instance, in Africa, services like what was rural extension services before, now you have this advisory services in a digitalized way. And the other very important use for small scale farmers is providing access to finances. So there are lots of new business providing credits or loans to small scale farmers through digital payments. And this is seems to be quite widespread in Africa. So what we discovered then is that there are also new issues like trying to link farmers to carbon markets, because, for instance, Microsoft has come up with a methodology to measure how much carbon small farmers are sequestering in their plots doing agroforestry. So they are providing with other actors these platforms for small scale farmers to be able to sell, of course, these carbon credits to companies like Microsoft, who has pledged on their own to reduce their emissions. So this is to tell you that the issue is not only machinery, the issue is not only gathering data, the issue is the completely reshaping of the infrastructure of the peasant economy as well. Because imagine if finances, rural extension services, and commerce is being digitalized, well, so you can imagine how much this will change the way of farming. So yeah, well, I wanted to share with you that this is the latest research that we have done. And therefore, it's, well, even putting much more questions to the questions on data that you raised, Fernando, and that we have, it was the first approach, how we approach the whole matter in terms of, for instance, land administration and so on and so forth. Thank you.
I think we have another question. Just one. So maybe.
And maybe we can take the questions you have. Yeah, like two in a row, and then we just start. We also started late.
Yeah. Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. Very short question. Oh, I'm Vilus. Yeah, from Lithuania, also working in rural areas, culture. I was wondering where can we find, I already Googled you, I guess, but I was looking for the research papers or any kind of, yeah, papers that we could use for further dissemination of the knowledge that you produce and also apply it if it's possible. Thank you. Okay, I will do it first. It's more than a question. Is hi, I'm Antonio, and thank you for sharing your experience. Actually, more than a question, is just a reflection because 2 weeks ago, with Jean, a colleague here from Milan Academy, we've been visiting a quite huge vineyard in the northeast of Sardinia, and that they use really strong technology for growing, and they just use like a forecast station, and in order to see when the plants of vineyards need water or what they need, or if they have to water them or whatever, and quite sophisticated technology from Israel. As the name of the company, but now, yeah. But at the same time, if you go to their website, they just show an old man working the vineyards, collecting grapes, you know, and using the toponymy of the place or all names of the place. And you know, they are like playing with local narratives, but at the same time they use such a huge technology to produce. So it's like I was really interested in this balance, actually, I would say, between the 2 way of communicate the system and to produce.
I think those were the questions. Any comment? Can you hear us?
I mean, just yeah, to react. I mean, to the first question about like, are you not finding the things you were looking for on our website? I guess this is, yeah, this is something that we have to figure out and to improve. But I think we can, if you're interested, I think we can put together like a small reader or something for you with our materials, if so that you can, in a way, yeah, study them and share them if you're interested. We can do that. I think that would be nice. And just on the last one, I was thinking, like, I mean, I think what you're saying, this is interesting. I think we're seeing it all the time, right? And it's partly about the imagery. And I think about, also I think like we should also be, it's also a reminder of just being like very cautious also about like being oversimplistic with these issues, right?
Or either we lost connection or he ran out of battery. But well, let's give a moment.
Presented. And so I think it's, in a way, it's yeah, just for ourselves, I think it's a very, like, it has to be a very nuanced discussion, right? As Sofia also said, it has so many nuances to it and it has so many elements to it. So I would say really like kind of oversimplifying is really kind of a bit of a danger here. And so, yeah, I mean, I was thinking, and I think the invitation is still open also with Fernando to kind of, and we're trying to figure out ways to continue this conversation, also specifically from a perspective of, you know, shepherding, pastoralism. perspective, and which is not so present actually in much of the literature. So I think it's a kind of it's an interesting field because there's so much to unpack there. And and I hope if today was a bit like maybe a first time to start doing it, and maybe there will be other opportunities in a way to, there's a lot to unpack, to discuss, and maybe that can work at a future occasion. We can continue that discussion.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you so much. We did share a text by Alistair, no, on digitalization, but it will be will be great to have other references. So thank you so much. We will let you to enjoy the evening. We're there in Italy and also in Munster. Sofia, take care, get better. And,
yes.
Yes, I hope we have the chance to meet in person soon.
To catch up, yeah.
Yes, but thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Fernando, for the invitation.
Yes.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.